We're turning in the Word of God to the passage that we read in the prophecy of Daniel in the chapter 6 of Daniel. It's a well-known chapter, and we all know it as the account of Daniel in the lion's den. Now, when you turn to this chapter and this experience of Daniel, there are some similarities between the passage in chapter 3, where it tells you about the three Hebrew children, as they're often called, though they must have been young men by this time, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And they were had a similar experience when they, for their faithfulness, were thrown into the fiery furnace. So this chapter is similar to that in some ways. And they both record very miraculous deliverances, and wonderful things happened to them. The fire didn't burn those in the fiery furnace, and the lions did not devour or harm in any way Daniel here, as he falls into, or is put into, the den of lions. And it shows us and reminds us of the miraculous powers of God. And soon, I say soon, we will, all of us, go beyond this life into another world. And as Christian men and women, we will go, as it were, into heaven. And there we see these glimpses of the miraculous works of God here in the two deliverances I've just mentioned. But there will be wonders untold. Our powers will soon be expanded, as one of the hymns says, expanded to an enormous and unfathomable rate and level. And it will be something quite wondrous, we believe. Well, we know it will be. Power over the elements, power over the brute creation, glimpses into a situation that is beyond now the conception of human beings, a sight of the vision of God and all the wonders and glories of his ways. So these little incidents, I should say, big things really, but these accounts here in Daniel and in other places, they're anticipations of the wondrous works of God. But then we could move on from that, just by way of introduction, and talk about this being the deliverance of Daniel in a trial, and yet not out of a trial. And sometimes we experience situations like that. We're not delivered from a trial, the trials of life. Man's born unto trouble as the sparks fly upwards. But instead of being delivered from the trial, we're delivered in the trial. And you know what I mean. Sometimes you dread something and it never happens. Other times it does happen. But as Christian men and women, we discover the presence of God even when it does happen, even in the midst of our trials. And Daniel certainly had that experience in this passage, as recorded in this passage. Paul said in the epistle to the Romans, I should say, he said this. He said that in all things we are more than conquerors through him that loved us. And sometimes when God does take us into a trial, we discover that we are more than conquerors through him that loved us. And we all learn in these trials, don't we? And we all find the presence of God in these trials, and we all discover that these trials are working our lasting good, and so on. You could go on. The trials of life seem so not unwanted and unnecessary, but they are for us in this fallen state as we grow in grace and the knowledge of God. We don't seek them, but sometimes God sends them, and we don't want them at all, but that we need them, and good comes out of them. So you could say all those things just by way of introduction. But then we should move on to say something about the situation that was pertaining at this point in time where this occurred. Now, there is a new ruler in Babylon at this time, and you see his name there in the first verse. Darius is the new ruler. He has overcome Belshazzar, and he has been dethroned, deposed, and it's a new regime, you may say. It's now in charge. Now, Belshazzar, just to go back to him for a second, he despised God, you could say that. And it turned out that though there were many visitations from God, blessings that he received from God, yet he rejected God. And now he's put down. And you know all about how this comes about. You just have to go up a few verses into the previous chapter, and you see there the account of the writing on the wall. And you've got, certainly in this Bible here, I've got the message that was written on the wall in the capital letters in this Bible. Mene, mene, tekel uparsin. Thou art weighed in the balance and found wanting. And so that man fell from his position, and that's recorded here. And all bad rulers in the end will fall from their positions, as history wonderfully illustrates. But anyway, before Belshazzar lost his place, before he was invaded, just in that brief period, he promotes Daniel to the highest position under himself in the land. And that was right at the very end of his reign, as you may say. And even right to the very end of his reign, God was working through him, as it were, working through him to work out his purposes through Daniel. So when the new king comes, when Darius arrives on the scene, Daniel is already in the highest position under the king in the land. And so, you know, Belshazzar did a good thing, really, just in the last few hours almost of his reign. So Daniel, as the new regime takes over, he is in a very high place indeed. And it says in verse 2, and over these three presidents, I better read the first verse, it pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 princes, which should be over the whole kingdom, ruling under him. And then to verse 2, and over these three presidents, of whom Daniel was the first, that the princes might give account unto them, and the king should have no damage. This Daniel was over all them. So under the king, he was the highest man in the land. That's how it began. And all in the providence and in the purposes of God. There is a hand of providence ruling all things, all the changing scenes of life. There is, and politics and all the other things. God is over all these things. And then, of course, because he is now the highest person in the land and the others are not, under the king is the highest person, jealousy rises up. All these other people, the 120 princes of the first verse there, they're envious of him. Why should Daniel have this position? And I'm going on to say in a minute that Daniel must have been a very old man just at this point. Some say he was in his 80s or even his 90s. It just shows there's no ageism in the Bible, doesn't it? There certainly was no ageism in this situation. But anyway, they're very jealous that he has got this account. And I'm telling you things you already know. They set about to get rid of him, to put him into a bad relationship with the king, the ruler, and to depose him in some way. or other. And you can imagine that they were going to try and find something wrong with him, something they could accuse him of, so that they could put him out of the way. And you can imagine, it doesn't say this in the scriptures, but they're observing his every move. That does say that in the scriptures, really. But you imagine that they check his accounts. Does he fiddle in the books or anything like that? They watch his timekeeping. Was he, lounging about when he should have been working? They listen to everything he says, in case he says something that would put him in a bad light. They look at any deviation from the truth they may have found, and his whole private life, his every move, comes under their scrutiny. They're going to find something wrong with them if it kills them. You see, wrong with him if it kills them. But they can't find anything wrong with him. Not that he was a perfect man, in the sense nobody is perfect. But in this secondary sense, he was perfect. So they come to the conclusion, again, I'm still telling you things you know, they wanted and thought the place to look is in regard to his religion, to his relationship with God. And that's where they're going to try and get rid of him from. And they come up with this idea, remember. They suggest to the king that he should produce a law that if anybody prays to any god or whatever over this period of 40 days, then that they shall be in trouble, sort of thing. Now, you may say, how would this man Darius fall for such a thing as that? You imagine, say you talk about Prince Charles, and somebody goes up to him and says, now, Charles, you ought to pass a law, you ought to require that if anybody praises anybody else for all this time, instead of you, you should put them to death. Well, yes, he wouldn't think of, nobody would think of saying it anyway, would they? And certainly anybody with any sense would dismiss it right away. And you say, well, that's why some people say the Bible's full of fairy stories. Nothing like this would ever happen, they say. But of course, they're completely wrong, because remember, Darius, he is belonging to the Medes and the Persians. This isn't his country, he's invaded it. He has come to a situation where there's a different religion and everything is different. And so these men are saying this, look, in this country, Babylon, this is how it works. The king is seen as God. The king is absolutely supreme. Whatever the king says has to be done. There is the king. He is the representative of God, as it were, in the world, but he's worshipped as a god, really. That's how we run the country. And they say to him, and if you're going to run the country properly, this is what you have to insist upon. You are the boss. You are God, as it were, over all these people. And that's what you must impress upon them, so that you would exert your authority over them. So it wasn't some crazy scheme at all. Darius, he must have been a bit anxious taking over this country now. Oh, this is what I have to do. This is good advice indeed. And so he falls for it straight away. And he puts that on the statute book, as it were. And that is the law. That is the rule. And he thinks these men have been very good to him, given him such wise advice. And so it goes along and so on. A symbol of loyalty. Well, they flattered him, didn't they? They flattered the king. You're in this powerful position. Exert it. John Bunyan says somewhere in the Pilgrim's Progress, beware of the flatterer. Beware of the flatterer. And we all like to get flattered, really, don't we, or comment. And encouraging people is quite a good thing. But beware of the flatterer. And he didn't beware of the flatterer, and he fell for this trick that they pulled upon him. And then it also says something about jealousy, doesn't it? I mentioned a few minutes ago, we're all prone to jealousy, every single one of us. Somebody famous said this: few are able to suppress in themselves their secret satisfaction at the misfortune of others. Jealousy produces that sort of attitude. I'm glad that Daniel been found out at last. They say he's the chief amongst the advisors and that. He isn't really. We're better people than he is. And so on. And so they go. But, that sort of attitude was their undoing. And it's been the undoing of many people in power ever since. I came across this, Alexander the Great. He has said that he wouldn't allow any of his generals, and he had a lot of generals, big army, any of these generals to be praised or anything good said about them in case it brought down, as it were, the good that might be said of him. I want people to say I'm good, not them. I'm the great champion here. Distracted from his greatness was the idea I was trying to think of. Yes, so it's a very dangerous thing, jealousy, even the mild forms that we're all prone to fall into. The Proverbs 14:30 says this: a sound heart is the life of the flesh. A sound heart is the life of the flesh, but envy, the rottenness of the bones. Envy, the rottenness of the bones. And it's a great warning to us, isn't it? James, in his epistle, 3 verse 16, says this: for where envy and strife is, there is confusion and every evil work. Beware of evil and strife. And to quote the litany of the Church of England, it says this: from envy, hatred and malice, and all uncharitableness, good Lord, deliver us. From envy, hatred, and malice, and all uncharitableness, good Lord, deliver us. We don't think much of the Church of England as it is now. And sadly, they've ditched all this sort of thing, haven't they? But it's nice to remember some of it because it can be very helpful. Anyway, so let us look now at Daniel. We've already said, it's estimated that he could have been in his 80s or his 90s when all this was taking place. And these keen eyes were watching him. How did he cope with all this, you may say? How did he cope? Well, you could say what he exerted now, what's visible now in this behavior, is really the result of the fruits of his early piety. We read that Daniel and these others were young men when they were brought down into Babylon. He's only probably a teenager, very young, really. But right from the first that we hear of him, he is faithful to God. And he is a pious, a believing, godly young man when we first meet him. And even as he rises in the ranks and influence and so on, he's still godly. So all from the beginning, he has adhered to, he is kept by the grace of God, the ways of God, and held to the things of God. And that now, those qualities now are really vital for his survival at this time. So we keep to the things of God. And it's a great thing if we began early, but we don't all begin early, but that's how it is. Now, Daniel prays to God in spite of Darius's new law. And he doesn't hide it, he's there, he opens his windows and nobody. And remember, if he was a man of such a high rank, he would have had servants and people, looking after him all over the place. His house wouldn't have been his own in some respects because he was full of servants, full of eyes, watching his every move. And that would be a demanding thing if you had somebody in your house watching your every move. It wouldn't be easy, would it? But he had a house full of them. So what does he do? Well, he just carries on as normal. But before we go on to that any further, just stick with this, thinking about the qualities that over a long time he had developed. And you could apply that to, I thought, to a church, to a chapel, to a gathering of God's people. This church has been here, is it 1875 or 76? Not sure. You can have a look on the page. 5, is it? 4, right, I went the wrong way. But it's been here a long time. And you can imagine, you who have been here a long time, some of the saints who were here in your younger days, and they would have, beyond that, of course, the pictures of some of them in the vestry. Godly people have been here for all that time. And just as Daniel built up this level of experience and walking with God, so on at the level of a chapel like this, within its walls, the godly people who have gone before us in this place, they built up a certain standard, a certain way of doing things, a certain attitude, certain knowledge and understanding of the Word of God. And though they're not here today, their prayers still are valid, and their example passes down the generations. And so you have within a chapel that has been here quite a long time, that sort of thing. Now it served Daniel. His earlier experiences served him in his older days. He was able to do what he did because he'd clung to his earlier beliefs. And a chapel can survive, does survive, if it honors what has gone before it. And Christianity as a whole survives because it honors that which has gone before it. Let me give you an example of what I'm trying to say. People today say, now we should try and make Christianity relevant to the outsider. Now, there is truth in that. We should try and communicate with the outsider and so on. That's our business. We go in all the world and preach the gospel, get through to these people, the need of salvation and the glories of Christ and all the rest of it. That's part of it, yes. But there's another part of it. We should think about getting through to the outsider. But at the same time, we should make sure, I say that again, we should make sure we don't lose the experience that has been built up, the truth that has been built up, the way of doing things that has been built up. I know in some chapels they do daft things and they keep on doing it just because everybody did it years ago. I don't mean that. I mean the essential truth of the gospel, the way of worshiping and the way of doing things in a Christian, biblical fashion. These are things which take years to build up. And just as Daniel's early experience kept him on the crucial time of great difficulty, so it is in our day when we face tremendous difficulties with the outside world. But that which we have is a precious gift of God, and we should look after it and make sure we don't squander it, as some people, hundreds of people have done. You've really got to see what the other denominations, many of them do. They alter the scriptures, they alter the message of the gospel. They have a social gospel instead of a spiritual gospel. They do bring the world into the church, and all those things. That's not going to get them anywhere, as you know. Daniel clung to what he knew as a young fellow. And now that when this great trial comes, he is able to survive it by the grace of God. And I got a great long quotation here, which I'll give you a bit of it. I was going to say this. There is built up in our country all this great Christian heritage, going back centuries, and we shouldn't squander it. We are doing, but we shouldn't. But what I came across was this piece of writing. It's by a man called Fastius. It looks, when you see this name, it looks like fastidious. It's the same spelling, actual fact. But if we call him Fastius, it sounds better than calling him fastidious. But anyway, he was around in the 5th century. That's the 600s. And I'll read a bit. What I want you to notice is the high standard. You think in the 600s, they were all barbarians, they were all uneducated, they couldn't read nor write, and all the rest of it. But listen to the standards of this man that he's just writing here. He says, "It is the will of God that his people should be holy." That's a revolutionary statement in the first place. It is the will of God that his people should be holy, and apart from all stain of unrighteousness, so righteous, so merciful, so pure, so unspotted from the world, so single-hearted, that the heathen should find no fault in them, but say with wonder, "Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord, and the people whom he hath chosen for his own inheritance. Let no man then deceive or mislead his brother. Except a man is righteous, he hath not life. Except he keep the commandments of Christ, he hath no part with him. A Christian is one who shows mercy to all, who is provoked by no wrong, who suffers not the poor in this world to be oppressed, who relieves the wretched, succors the needy, mourns at the mourners, feels the pain of another as his own, who is moved to tears by the sight of another's tears, whose house is open to all, whose table is spread for all the poor, whose good deeds all men know, whose wrongful deeds no man feels." And so he goes on, "whose hope is fixed on Christ, desiring heavenly things rather than earthly, and leaving human things to lay hold on things divine." They were saying that in our country back in the 600s. And men that built on that, followed that pattern. Oh, there have been dark periods like today. But that standard has grown up. And just as Daniel, the piety of his youth stood him in such good stead now, as an old man, you see the connection. You see the difference that is here. So, we go on. Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself along these lines. He wouldn't defile himself with the king's meat or the king's ideas or any such thing, and so on. So, we've got these things, and it brings me to mind one of my Sunday school hymns that I like repeating. Have you had a kindness shown? Pass it on. I'm thinking about passing on the inheritance, you see. Have you had a kindness shown? Pass it on. It wasn't meant for you alone. Pass it on. It may travel down the years. They may wipe another's tears, till in heaven it reappears. Pass it on. And that's what was going on. And I came across this slight aside, but it's relevant, I think. When you think of Babylon, you think, well, the hanging gardens of Babylon, sophisticated, advanced in so many ways, rich, prosperous. Babylon. You may have been tempted to say, well, Daniel and his 3 friends being brought down to Babylon as teenagers, maybe they were bringing to some wonderful place, Babylon. But when you read into Babylon, what historians have said and found out about Babylon, one writer said this: Babylon at that time when Daniel gets there as a boy, a young man, Babylon at that time was half shambles, half pigsty. Was a very nice way of describing it, wasn't it? What he goes on to say, on the one hand, there was luxury and opulence. But the majority of the people lived in a place that was a shambles and a pigsty, no more than a pigsty. Daniel was brought into this place, so it wasn't a very nice place to come to, but there was opulence and all that, and then there was all this. Anyway, he came there. He came there and was faithful. But in such a place, Daniel came. And we've come in a way to such a place, haven't we? What about our land? Would you say half shambles and half pigsty was getting to be a bit of a, true about it? Yes, there is opulence. Yes, there is riches. Yes, there are splendid things. But it was half shambles and half pigsty. He came to that. And what I'm saying is, saints can survive in any conditions. Any conditions. The New Testament tells us there were saints in Caesar's household, and that wouldn't have been a very nice place, would it? And then you may say, well, what about all those saints? We thought about these sort of fellows 30, 40 years ago. The saints in the Iron Curtain, behind the Iron Curtain, the Eastern Bloc countries, Romania and those sort of places. It wasn't very nice for them. But the wonder of it was, it produced splendid Christians, didn't it? You think about those tales of the Romanians a few decades ago, how they had big churches. They did. And lots of them, and some great preachers came out of it. Out of the trials and the tribulations, great things can grow. And if you go to those Eastern Bloc countries today, it's nowhere near as fervent, genuine, prosperous spiritually as it was when they were under persecution. Daniel under persecution does great things. Anyway, we don't want to be persecuted, but there it is. Through every period of his life, he was faithful. When we were at school, we sang English traditional songs. A very good sort of training for life. And one of them was The Vicar of Bray. Do you know it? In good King Charles's golden days, when loyalty no harm meant, a zealous high church man was I, and so I got preferment. First verse. Second verse. When James comes along, the next king, remember he was a secret Roman Catholic. Roman Catholics were in the forefront. So the Vicar of Bray, whatsoever king may reign, I'll be the Bishop of Bray, sir. He becomes a Catholic. And then go a bit further, and you get the Georgian kings, firm Protestants. And guess what? The Vicar of Bray was a firm Protestant. And so it goes on. Now, there are a lot of people today who are like that, like the Vicar of Bray. They change with the times. But Daniel didn't do that, did it? He was faithful through all the different reigns. Whoever king came along, Daniel was there. But we've just got time to mention his humility. I can only just mention it, really. Through all these things, he is a humble servant of God. They said the same thing about John Milton, you know. He was a genius, but he was a very humble man. He never wrote about himself, maybe the odd line here and there, which was necessary. But Daniel doesn't write about himself, really, and that's a good thing. I'm only mentioning these things. We could do a lot more about it. But what about his courage? I mean, certainly if there was ever a man of courage, dare to be a Daniel, dare to stand alone, dare to have a purpose firm, and dare to make it known. Do you know that one? I don't know. Many giants, great and tall, stalking through the land, headlong to the earth would fall if met by Daniel's band. And so there was Daniel, firm to the end. Dr. Gill was a great strict Baptist, really. He was the minister of the Metropolitan Tabernacle before the name was ever coined, really. And he wrote that great book, The Cause of God and Truth. And it is a book that really spells out the truth in no uncertain terms. He was a very firm Calvinist. And people in his church said, Dr. Gill, if you produce this book, you'll lose a lot of friends. Dr. Gill, if you produce this book, you'll lose a lot of money. For the sale of books, people won't buy your books, and all that. And People do that, don't they? People say if there's a point of issue, point of principle, some people could say, well, you could just trim on that a bit. You can imagine people saying to Daniel, now look here, Daniel, you're not supposed to pray for all these days. But who's to say you don't pray in secret? You know, you're still praying, because it's good that you've got this high position that you have. You could be a big influence in the land. What's the good of throwing it away just for the sake of praying out loud for everybody to see, where you could just so easily pray in secret? Compromise. But he didn't. He wouldn't have been the man if he had. And so these are some of the lessons that we can learn from Daniel. There was a greater than Daniel, our Lord Jesus Christ, who was faithful to death, even unto the cross, the death of the cross. And our faithful Savior Jesus Christ is faithful to us, and we should be faithful to him. And so we'd better, no, we won't sing our hymn, will we? We'll go into the Lord's Supper. There'll just be a slight pause, and then we'll go into that.